This is reform quake. That's what's going on across the country today. These are the most astonishing set of local election results in the history of our country.
Apologies for starting a stream with Nigel Farage. There was no trigger warning. But after winning the Runcorn by-election, one mayoralty and a number of councils, Reform have, it's undeniable, had a remarkably good night. How should we respond, I suppose? To discuss it all, I'm joined by Aaron Bastani. Aaron, we've already done one stream today, and I was just saying to Gary how much of a pleasure it is speaking to you on days after elections, because you love it, I think. It really, you can really sort of read it in your body language that you love this stuff.
We're living through a really profound political shift in this country, Michael. People love to talk about this stuff in the media game, right? This is huge, this is enormous, pay attention. People are constantly trying to get your attention. This is the biggest political shift in this country since the rise of the Labour Party at the start of the 20th century, the demise of the Liberals a century ago. The rapidity, the velocity with which we're seeing the rise of Reform as a new political party in this country is bigger than the rise of Labour, certainly quicker. I mean, whether they'll last a century is another matter, than Labour a century ago. And to go from potentially 0 seats to government of some kind within 2 parliamentary cycles would be without precedent. I mean, people talk about Brexit, Trump. It's just a crazy, crazy story. Now, it's not my politics, and I think we need to respond to that politically, but that itself creates a certain sense of political urgency and momentum. So, yeah, I do love it, Michael. I like things happening.
I suppose you'd be talking about sort of Syriza is sort of the last example I can remember where a sort of tiny party goes on to become obviously Reform haven't become a parliamentary majority. We're talking about local elections, but the extent to which they have overturned Labour and Tory majorities across the country is quite remarkable. Later in the show, we will discuss 2 non-election stories. And so one of those is the Israelis bombing a humanitarian aid ship heading for Gaza. The other is Mark Zuckerberg suggesting that the loneliness crisis that he in part created can be solved by creating millions of Meta-produced AI friends for us all. Stay tuned for all of that. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. We really, really do appreciate it. As we said on our stream beforehand, it's sort of impossible to give an account of Reform that doesn't include the launch and growth of GB News. Now, obviously, the GB News had millions and millions of pounds in venture capital. I think if you say, what's the left-wing version of that? We're kind of the closest to it, I suppose. We're only funded by you, right? So we work on a fraction of the budget. We're trying to increase our impact. So do please go to novaramedia.com/support if you're already a supporter. Thank you so much. Reform UK has pulled off what for decades has looked like a political impossibility, breaking the hold of the 2-party system on English politics. Their morning started well with an incredibly close by-election win in Labour's 16th safest seat. A former Conservative councillor, Sarah Potchin, took Runcorn and Helsby by just 6 votes. Here she is speaking after her win.
The people of Runcorn and Helsby have spoken. Enough is enough. Enough Tory failure, enough Labour lies. And I want to thank every one of you who were brave enough to put a cross against my name on the ballot paper. Every one of you who voted for change. Every one of you who have put their faith in me as your next Member of Parliament for this constituency, which has such potential, and who have put their faith in Nigel Farage as the next Prime Minister of this great country.
More good news for Reform came when they won their first mayoralty. So Greater Lincolnshire's first mayor will be the former Tory MP, Andrea Jenkins, who won comfortably with 42% of the vote. And this is from her acceptance speech.
Today, we as Reform, as we're making gains up and down the country, you will see an end to soft-touch Britain. The fight back to save the heart and soul of our great country has now begun. Now that Reform is in a place of power, we can help start rebuilding Britain. Inch by inch, Reform will reset Britain to its glorious past. We will tackle illegal migration. We've been working on policies. I say no to putting people in hotels. Tents are good enough for France. they should be good enough for here in Britain. But I take my hat off to our great leader, Nigel. Now, he has fought for decades, and he still fights for you here today. And I know one day he will make a magnificent Prime Minister.
So they're all putting out the same message, essentially, which is these election wins, this is all in aid of Nigel Farage becoming Prime Minister. We talk a lot about sort of charisma being important in politics now. With all due respect to Andrea Jenkins, there were a lot of pauses there that didn't necessarily, get followed by something worthy of the pause. Just before we came on air, Reform's candidate in a different mayoralty, and he's former Olympic boxing champion Luke Campbell, and became the new mayor of Hull and East Yorkshire. Reform also came a close second to Labour in some areas you wouldn't expect them to do well. So in the west of England, the Labour candidate beat Reform by just 3 percentage points. Labour's Ros Jones, who's been mayor of Doncaster since 2013, held her seat by just 1 percentage point over Reform. And in North Tyneside, it was even closer, with Labour beating Reform by less than a percentage of the vote share. So with a few little swings, it could have been a complete blowout. Votes are still being counted in around half of the 22 county councils that went to the polls yesterday. So you've got a by-election for an MP, you've got these mayoralty elections, and then you've got the council elections. In those that have already declared, the results again show a historic swing in voter loyalties to a party that only won its first MPs a year ago. So in Leicestershire, Reform became the largest party. This was one of the ones where the Conservatives were still predicting they would be the largest party. Reform, as you can see, 25, up 25 because they didn't have any seats before. The Conservatives down 27. So just a massive shift. In Kent, Reform completely obliterated the opposition. So of 81 seats, Reform have 57. The Conservatives have lost 57. Now, this is out of only 81 seats, right? So this is Reform winning 2/3 or almost 2/3, and the Conservatives losing all of that. Actually, no, it is 2/3, isn't it? Some of their most dramatic wins came in counties in the Midlands and North, where they took seats from the Tories and Labour. And Reform now have a majority in Lancashire. So you can see out of 84 seats, they've got 53. 40 of those, or the Conservatives are down 40 and Labour down 27. So they've picked them up from both of those parties. In Derbyshire, you can see Reform on 42. Again, a stumping majority. Out of 64 seats, they've got 42. The Conservatives down 33. Labour down 11. Labour only on 3 seats. The Conservatives are only on 12. In Staffordshire, another dramatic result. Out of 62 seats, Reform on 49. So that is a whopping majority. There's barely going to be an opposition there. You're just going to have 10 Conservative MPs in opposition. They've lost 46. And in Durham, which is probably, I think, the most dramatic of them all, so out of 98 seats, Reform won 65 of them. Labour are down 38 in that constituency. The Conservatives also down considerably, so the Conservatives down 15. Nigel Farage appears to have spent much of the day in Durham, where he said this to the BBC.
Two-party politics just died in front of our eyes. What happened here in County Durham and in Lancashire and in Runcorn and Helsby, really is, for the Labour Party, pretty cataclysmic. And what's happening to the Conservatives in the Shires is an apocalypse. I'm not even sure the Conservative Party can survive this in the long term. So, yeah, big day. And you know what? People vote for us because they want change. They are sick of the two-party system.
I think we can show you for an overall sense of where we are now. As I say, some seats still being counted, but let's go to the BBC ticker where they sort of have the latest. So you can see that as of now, Reform have gained 584 councillors. The Lib Dems have gained 140. They're on 338. The Conservatives only have 270 councillors and they'd lost 579. So it looks like they've lost about 2/3 of the councillors who were standing. Labour on 81, down 161. So terrible night for both the Conservatives and Labour, and a phenomenal night for Reform, and slightly less so the Lib Dems. You can see the Greens there. They have actually massively increased their number as a proportion. So they're on 74 councillors, up 42, which I suppose would be impressive on a normal day. The fact that you've got Reform up 584, I suppose, puts it in a slightly different perspective. Aaron, we're going to focus later in the show on sort of what this means for the Conservatives and Labour. Let's for now focus on how significant it is, these gains for reform.
It's really important for a bunch of reasons, Michael. You look at a local authority like Durham, where Reform have now 55, 60 councillors, I think 55 plus councillors. Those are people who were party activists. Previously, they would have been canvassing for no material benefits themselves. Now they'll be at a minimum on 12, 13, 14, 15,000, more than that probably actually. Some of them will be in cabinet portfolio roles, probably like Darren Grimes, where you'll be on 35, 40,000 pounds a year. Now, what that means in the medium term, having your activists paid to do stuff is a tremendous advantage. The Greens don't win Bristol Central for Carla Denyer at the last general election if they don't, prior to that, win a huge number of seats on Bristol City Council. So I think winning Durham City Council like this for Reform is a tremendous launch pad for winning multiple constituencies across that authority at the next general election. And I suspect that's how Reform are going to do their target seats. They're going to do basically what the Greens did, but, triple X, right? Which is to say they'll use these areas as the platform to basically target parliamentary constituencies. You can see that in Durham. I think you'll probably see it in bits of the Northwest. You'll certainly see it in the Midlands. You'll see it somewhere like Kent, massive breakthrough in Kent Council. These now are dozens of activists who will be fully committed to winning 4 or 5 MPs in that particular authority at the next time of asking. I know you mentioned Luke Campbell, who's won now the mayoralty in East Yorkshire and Hull for Reform. I mean, this is a really great example. Somebody like that winning for Reform, let's say they get a few councillors in there. I don't think that authority was up for grabs. But somebody like Luke Campbell winning, you say, look, there are 3 very vulnerable Labour MPs in Hull, Emma Hardy and a few others. I think Diana Coyle. That is a tremendous launchpad to take those people out. So often when the national media, the London media, talks about local politics, they view it as separate from, Westminster politics because that's all they care about. But actually, this is not just about seizing power at a local level, demonstrating you can do stuff, you can control stuff, you can run stuff, which is a huge test for Reform. But also these two things link up, of the local and the national. It gives you massive amounts of resources and profile, to start winning nationally. So, this kind of success at a local level, just because it's 100 or 200 miles away from where you live, don't dismiss it. Hugely important in terms of winning MPs.
Dave Atkins says, this is a bit too soon for Reform. There's too much time for these new councillors to F up. Do you think Reform had time to do due diligence on this many councillors? No way, which is an interesting point. And I suppose it's not just about due diligence, because it might be that sort of a bunch of these people turn out to be complete idiots. But it's also that, governing is difficult, right? It's what Nigel Farage is very good at as a politician, is sort of not coming up with detailed answers, saying all the other guys are idiots, I'll solve all your problems. Now, in these councils where Reform are now the dominant party, it's not just the dominant party, the majority party. It is unlikely that they're suddenly going to be able to solve everyone's problems. So could this be, is there a problem that this also creates for Reform, as well as being an electoral victory for them?
Sure. I mean, it doesn't just have upsides. It has downsides too. I think winning mayoralties is great. I think mayoralties have very few downsides, and they only have upsides for a party like Reform or the Greens, because frankly, people don't blame the mayor for anything, nor should they, because they don't really have that much power. So Reform winning somewhere like in Hull with the mayor or Lincolnshire, I think what that gives them is a major profile, although Andrea Jenkins is anything but major. My goodness, she can barely even sentences. How on earth is she a dame? I think we should not have dames and sirs, but my God, if you're going to have them, at least give them to people that can, like I say, complete sentences. What it does is it gives you a national political figure, major profile, and they can be part of the national conversation. They can drive the national conversation. You saw it with Andy Burnham during COVID, right? He was a national political figure in a way that was far more prominent than an MP. So it gives you that profile, gives you that status, gives you that that media impact. You don't have to do anything, right? Whereas actually, if you're the leader of Durham Council, you don't necessarily have that much of a profile, and it's really bloody hard. And there's a ton of downsides. So I think they will face challenges with regards to local authorities, Michael. I think, frankly, the mayor's thing is just great. You should have as many mayors as possible. There's just upside. You can do loads of high-profile stuff and get a great, name for yourself. Look at Ben Houchin in Tees Valley for the Tories. But I think, the local government challenges with councils is going to be very, very hard. Because remember, Michael, because of austerity, as a local council, your job really is to administer cuts. Your job is to administer scarcity. You can't really do very much, right? You basically have to organise and coordinate the shit that's been doled out to you by central government because central government funding has been cut by 40 to 50% over the last 15 years. It will be ironic, Michael, and I'm sure this will happen, to see reform-led authorities asking, begging, and they should beg, they need more money, but begging central government for more money for them to be able to do stuff. That's what will happen, to pay for basic things like social care, elderly care, children with special needs, childcare, potholes, So I think there's an interesting dynamic there as well. Yes, it'll be difficult for reform, but also they are rhetorically making the argument for small government right now. But I think the reality of actually having to govern stuff and manage stuff means that in reality, they're going to be asking for more and more money. They certainly don't want to be increasing people's council tax, right? So very, very interesting. And this idea that local government is wasting all of its money on DEI and climate change, it's nonsense. I'm sure you can save a little bit of money. Yeah, you end work from home or whatever, you can save a little bit of money. But we're an aging population. Elderly care needs are rocketing. And this is frankly a competence which shouldn't be coordinated by local government authorities. It should be a national thing, but we pay for it through council tax. Local authorities have to administer something as important as elderly care. It's a poison chalice, I think, fundamentally. So it's a really, really great point. Is it too early? I don't really buy that argument. I don't really buy that argument. If they had this election a year before a general election, that would be really good for them. I don't buy that. I think there will be downsides. But what Reform is doing is something that I think the left needs to do, which is they are building a national political organization. They are building a cadre. And there's not much ideology there right now, but they're building an organization of several 100,000 people. And that's what you need if you want to take over the state and run it. Okay, whatever you want to do with it. Cut tax, increase tax, socialize public services, get rid of public services. That's what you need, particularly in Britain, where we have this very centralized state with all of its competence tied up in Westminster.
Let's look at the other parties. So as I say, it was a bad night for Labour. We'll talk about that in detail in a moment. It was arguably even worse for the Conservatives. So they have so far lost 12 councils. And as of now, they have not held a single one. So every council they were defending, they've lost. We've already shown you a lot of the counties they lost to Reform, but they also lost some of their leafier neighbourhoods to the Lib Dems, like Wiltshire in the southwest. You can see the Conservatives down 24, the Lib Dems up 16. So the Conservatives lost control. Also in Gloucestershire, there is no overall party control. The Conservatives, again, lost their majority, down 24 to just 6 seats. The Lib Dems and Reform both up 11. There was one win for the Tory party, though. Former Tory MP Paul Bristow became mayor in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. It's a lot of bad news for Tory leader Kemi Badenoch, though, who spoke in Peterborough late this afternoon.
What I saw everywhere I campaigned was that people are fed up with the Labour government. They were angry about winter fuel payments. They were angry about the jobs tax, but they are still not yet ready to trust us. We have a big job to do to rebuild trust with the public. That's the job that the Conservative Party has given me, and I'm going to make sure that we get ourselves back to the place where we are seen as the credible alternative to Labour.
What can you say when you've just lost all of those seats? I suppose what she is saying is I've only been leader for 6 months. I'm blaming the previous guys. I don't know if her days will be numbered, perhaps in a sign that the vultures are circling. And Badenoch's enemies within the party are loudly declaring their loyalty on the airwaves today to say, I'm just making it known that I'm here. I'm very supportive of Kemi Badenoch, but if another vacancy were to arise, potentially I would be around. This was former Tory Minister Robert Jenrick on the BBC.
Kemi Badenoch is doing a bloody good job in difficult circumstances. It's extremely challenging being the leader of the opposition immediately after suffering our worst ever election defeat.
Aaron, I want your thoughts on this. I suppose not so much on sort of the internal politics of the Conservative Party, but more whether we are about to see the Conservatives be replaced by Reform. Because this has been a bad night for Labour. Labour looked like, they could definitely lose a lot of seats to Reform at the next general election. But if you were to sort of see a complete realignment in politics, it's not Labour that would get replaced by Reform, it's the Conservatives. So could we see a new party alignment where you have Labour as the left-wing party or the centre-left party and the Reform as the right-wing or centre-right or populist right or whatever you want to call them party? Do you think that's now plausible over the next few years?
Well, Morgan McSweeney and Keir Starmer certainly hope so. I think this is really important to nail down, Michael. We've criticised Labour. Labour have come in from a bashing from the media, but the Tories have had a worse night than Labour. Labour have been in government now for 10 months. Normally, in the first set of local elections immediately following general election defeat, you get some kind of a bounce back. This is an extraordinary statistic, Michael. If you look at the voter percentages for each party last night, and of course, voter turnout was lower in these elections than in a general election. You haven't had votes across the country. It's only in certain authorities, although it should be said, overwhelmingly Tory voting authorities in 2021. But if you look at the voter percentages, with all those caveats included, the Conservative Party nationally, given the models that the BBC is working on, nationally would win 12 seats. 12. Right? Reform will be on 376, Labour on 113. 12, not 100, 12. They're getting very close to single digits there. Now, do I think that's going to happen? No. Although the Canadian Conservatives went down to 2 seats at their nadir. What I think the present direction of travel does indicate, though, is that they're sliding even further down from July 2024, which was meant to be their low point, their nadir as a political party. And I think right now, if you had to bet on it, you would say that Kemi Badenoch and the Conservatives at the next general election would be likely to win fewer than 100 seats. That seems like a perfectly plausible bet to make, given the rise of Reform, and the Lib Dems certainly don't seem to be losing any of the momentum they had from last year. Those wealthier southern seats seem pretty cozy for the Lib Dems still. The Tories aren't making a comeback there. And so I do think, Michael, within the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to see some kind of contest, some kind of gauntlet thrown down. I think this time is too soon. I think probably the next set of local elections next year, next May, I think. I think that's when those are another failure, somebody like Robert Jenrick is going to go for the top job in the party.
Let's go on to the Labour Party. Before we do, if you're enjoying this analysis and Aaron's passion and enthusiasm when it comes to local elections, do consider becoming a supporter of Novara Media. You are what makes this all possible. If you're already a regular subscriber, thank you so much. If not, please do go to novaramedia.com/support. Labour's local election losses would, you'd think, have taught the party a lesson about how the country rates its governance. And you'd also think its by-election loss in Runcorn and Helsby, one of the safest Labour seats in the country, might put a rocket under them. But Keir Starmer's Labour doesn't seem to be in the mood for taking tips from anyone, not even from one of the very few Labour victors in what was otherwise a total washout. Labour's Ros Jones, who held on to her position as Mayor of Doncaster by just 700 votes over Reform, was asked by BBC Radio Sheffield where Starmer had gone wrong.
I think the results here tonight will demonstrate that they need to be listening to the man, woman and businesses on the street and actually deliver for the people, with the people.
Has he been listening thus far?
Well, on certainly 2 or 3 occasions, I would say no, they haven't actually realised, because the people of Doncaster know how hard life can be.
When you say 2 or 3 occasions, so you've named winter fuel allowance, that decision is something that you didn't agree with. What are the other 2 that you would cite?
I think they need to look again, because actually putting up the cost of national insurance is hitting some of our smaller businesses. And of course, the PIP, which we know many people are worried about now. So my answer to them is get involved in the consultation and ensure you put your points over.
As I say, I mean, she nearly lost, right? So this isn't like a day we say, oh, Ros Jones, yeah, she's exactly, she's a winner, right? I mean, she did win the seat, but I think that advice she gave to the Labour Party there is good advice. And from what I'm hearing, obviously I didn't knock on any doors over this period. I know that Aaron has been out and about in Runcorn, but journalists and activists have said that the number one thing that comes up on the doorstep is the cut to the winter fuel payments, right? And it was just an electorally bizarre thing to do. The moment you get into power, you piss off kind of the most important electoral constituency in the country, which is retirees, which is what Labour immediately did. I suppose it's about showing whose side you're on as well, isn't it? Going from 100% of people getting a winter fuel payment to about 20%. Right? Why do that? Right? I mean, clearly they're going to be regretting it now, but they're making a similar move again with PIP, aren't they? PIP affects so many people. So that's that money you get with extra support to help live a fulfilling life with your disability. So if you struggle to walk, it might involve a car or, various sort of mobility equipment, hearing aids and the like, things that make it easier to live your life. They are saying they're going to cut that. Fresh out, though, of a historic election in which the two main parties look set to have taken less than 50% of the votes between them, Starmer's Labour was still business as usual. Hitting the news rounds this morning was Ellie Reeves, Labour Party chair and sister of Chancellor Rachel Reeves, who gave audiences an object lesson in why Labour will just keep losing. Asked repeatedly about the Runcorn and Helsby by-election loss, which Reform won by just 6 votes, Reeves sounded hardly bothered at all.
I know you were out there campaigning, weren't you? But there was no sign of Keir Starmer, and there are those people who are pointing the finger saying, actually, it only came down to 6 votes in the end. That's just a couple of households. That could have made a real difference, couldn't it, if the Labour Party leader had actually gone there to campaign?
Well, it's not unusual for prime ministers not to be campaigning in by-elections, and Keir Starmer's been getting on with running the country. In the last few weeks, he's saved British steel. He's represented the UK at the Pope's funeral. He's been engaging with business, visiting Jaguar Land Rover, for example. So I don't think it's particularly unusual for a prime minister not to be campaigning in a by-election.
Labour had a majority of nearly 15,000 just 10 months ago.
Yeah, and
it's a seismic swing, isn't it, to Reform?
And incumbent governments tend not to do well. And if you look at the results there across the country, you've just spoken some of those mayoral campaigns. We hold the mayoralty in the west of England, in Doncaster, in North Tyneside, and in Runcorn. We weren't able to hold on to that seat by a very narrow margin, and it was in difficult circumstances.
We're talking about the 16th safest seat in the whole of the country, and you've lost. Why?
Well, look, when we were elected last July to government, we were elected on a mandate of change. And we know that the country is impatient for change. We are as well.
When we were elected, we wanted change, but Keir Starmer was visiting a Jaguar factory. And therefore he couldn't get to the election. But we did win 3 mayors. We're not sure what they'll do, as mayors can't take money off old people, but we'll think of something. This is what Keir Starmer is taking away from the losses.
I get it. We were elected in to deliver change. We started that change. Waiting lists are down, wages are up, interest rates are down, huge, massive difference to people who are mortgage holders. But the message I take out of these elections is that we need to go further and we need to go faster on the change that people want to see. And that's what I'm determined to do.
Aaron, I mean, there's a high road we could take and a low road we could take in this conversation. I suppose the high road is to talk about policy and to say that Labour have made a number of decisions which has sort of shown they're on the wrong side of the argument when it comes to fuel payments for older people, when it comes to PIP. I mean, the budget where Rachel Reeves was trying to get that money for the NHS, fair enough. I'm not against raising taxes to pay for the NHS, but I think the fact that because they were limited by their manifesto commitments to not raise income tax or corporate tax meant that they had to go onto a tax which it does seem like it will affect the employment decisions that small businesses make or the hiring decisions that small businesses make. They're the policy sort of issues I think we could discuss. The lower road is, I do think Labour has a serious problem that so many of its frontbenchers who it puts out on TV all the time, Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, Ellie Reeves, Bridget Phillipson, they all sound like robots. Like none of them can speak with a sort of, in a way that sort of reads as human. And I do think that is, it might sound cruel to say that, but I do think it should kind of be a bare minimum for a political project to have some people who can go and speak to the media and speak to the public who sound like, that they're talking like a normal person, not like they are trained to speak like a robot, to not say anything wrong, but also not to quite say anything right or even anything at all. It's how do you solve that, I suppose?
Well, it's almost like the Labour Party, and I think this is the case. I think they select against people with personality and something unique about them and a bit of oomph. If you have that, you will literally not be selected as a candidate for the party. That's viewed as necessarily bad. Being a professional, grown-up politician is just sounding like everybody else, having nothing that distinguishes you from the morass of Labour MPs, and you just sound dull as dishwater. It doesn't work anymore. I mean, it hasn't worked for a very long time, but it really doesn't work anymore, particularly when you're in a different kind of setup with the likes of Reform or Greens or Independents in the case of George Galloway, right? We're talking in sort of, multicolour tones here rather than black and white. When it's, Tories and Labour kind of sound the same, both really boring, really dull, professionalism, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. You can get away with it. This really hit home to me, Mike, when I was watching the response. By the way, it was awful coverage on the BBC overnight. Awful. The studio looked crap. Everybody was really dull, really low energy, low information. I mean, low energy, okay, it's 5 a.m. or whatever. But it was just crap TV. But it was really, really noticeable, Michael. You'd have the representatives from Labour, including Bridget Phillipson, just really dull, not saying anything. Same with the Tories, same with the Lib Dems. You'd have somebody from Reform. I think it was Dr. David Bull, was the former deputy leader of Reform at one point, former MEP. It was like daytime TV, right? Now, of course, for the political class, they go, oh my God, that's not what a politician sounds like. And for the public, they go, yeah, that's not what a politician sounds like. I like that. Let's have more of that. And it's really lost on these people, Michael. And I don't think it's a low or a high road here. I think you're right on both counts. Firstly, Labour saying we've not delivered quickly enough. We need to deliver. We promise to deliver. People are upset with what you have delivered. People aren't upset about what you haven't delivered. They're upset about what you have delivered. Okay? They're upset about winter fuel allowance being withdrawn from 10 million of 12 million people. They're upset about cuts to PIP. Other people that are voting Reform are upset about what you're doing on other issues. Okay, we can talk about migration or we can talk about Great British Energy or whatever. People aren't angry for whatever reason, left or right. People aren't angry with Labour because they're not doing stuff. That's just simply not true. That is simply not the case. And so I do think they've got an issue of they've executed on really bad stuff. And I think, this is not me just saying this because I'm on the left. It's incontrovertible that PIP and the winter fuel allowance, in terms of return on investment, you've saved 1.4 billion on winter fuel allowance. It is, without doubt, the most avoidable political own goal of my life. Okay, the poll tax was going to raise money. Invading Iraq meant you keep an alliance alive with the United States. Okay, David Cameron promising a referendum on membership of the European Union meant he won a parliamentary majority in 2015. This gave you 1.4 billion. And they've lost so many councillors as a result of that. They keep Runcorn with thousands upon thousands as a majority if they don't do the winter fuel allowance. It's insane, Michael. So I think it's a combination of two things. And the fact that even now, they can't have an honest accounting as to why they've been rejected like this. They're saying, well, we're not delivering quickly enough. That's not what people are saying. Okay? It's what you are delivering that's the problem. Alongside the way that they present themselves politically, I think they're in really, really big trouble, Michael. And I think, you know what, Labour should count their blessings that so far there's not been a new party of the left with massive personality. And they should count their blessings that the Green Party so far haven't got their arse in gear with regards to a national media operation. If it was 1/5 as powerful as Reform's, Labour would be in big trouble. Labour would be in as big trouble as the Tories are. And the Tories are in big trouble, right? I just talked about that BBC modelling putting the Tories on 12 seats, right? I think they probably win less than 100 seats in the next election. Labour are very lucky that the Greens haven't gone properly down the left populist route, and that there's not been a new left party that just, even if that wasn't successful, in 100 seats takes 5-6% of your vote. They're very lucky that's not happened. But they still can't have an honest accounting, which I think that's what should set off alarm bells. Things can go wrong. That happens all the time. But if you have the people that have the capacity to step back, say, how do we rectify this? You should be okay. If I was advising Keir Starmer, the first thing I would say is, tomorrow we go out, we repeal the winter fuel allowance. We say, we're giving it back. We made a mistake. We're sorry. Contrition. I would do that. Even though, by the way, I think that you probably should take it away from some people. I wouldn't have gone from 12 to 2 million people receiving it. I probably would have gone from like 12 to 10 million just to start, just gradually, gently, rather than taking it away from people that really need it. That's what they should do. The point is, though, Michael, Keir Starmer is incapable of that kind of politics. He's incapable of authenticity, incapable of it. It's an overused term, but he can't do it. Farage is going to monster him in terms of charisma and personality. And the whole point of the Labour right and establishment politics in this country is the position is you don't do that in order to be a professional politician, right? So they've self-selected for 400 plus people who can't do that. Terrifying prospect.
Can you imagine a Farage Keir Starmer sort of prime ministerial debate? He would just destroy him. I mean, the thing with Keir Starmer, and that is why I feel like the case for him wasn't as weak as it is for some others, is that he had done something with his life. So for lots of sort of like the Labour frontbench MPs, you can just tell so immediately that they haven't really ever had a job. They haven't done anything other than sort of get their degree, then work as a Labour Party staffer, then become a councillor, then become an MP. It's kind of all they've ever done. Keir Starmer, he clearly is a talented, impressive man, right? To become Director of Public Prosecutions. I think that the process for hiring for that is relatively meritocratic, right? Clearly he is good at something, but he's not good at being the leader of a political party. With a lot of them, you can just point and say, these are just very average people, right? What more would you expect? They're very average people who didn't get promoted through talent, but they got promoted because they didn't threaten the people who could promote them. Whereas that's probably not the case with Keir Starmer, but I suppose whatever made him successful in his previous career isn't really working as Prime Minister.
I'd also add, Michael, what requires a good lawyer is entirely different to what requires a good politician. A good politician can take calculated risks. Starmer can't take risks. You saw it with the ruling by the Supreme Court with regards to the Gender Recognition Act, the Equality Act 2010, and the definition with regards to that legislation of what is a woman. And Keir Starmer literally said, the ruling has said this, therefore I think this. Now, as a lawyer, that's a perfectly tenable position. As the Prime Minister of a country, that's not a tenable position. It's wild. People go, what on earth? You're leading the country, man. You can't say, I believe this thing. Now I believe this thing because a court said it. Crazy. And that to me summed the man up. And I don't think he was lying, right? I don't think he was dissimulating. That was the essence of Keir Starmer. The court has decided this, therefore it's the truth. Therefore it's what I believe. And in a moment of real political volatility and challenges, geopolitical and domestic, you're a rabbit in the headlights, mate, Big trouble.
No, I think it's a really good point. We got two more stories, so we shall move away from the elections. Of course, I imagine there'll be plenty of updates over the weekend, so we'll come back to this story on Monday. For now, though, and also, support us. I told them that before this story, but I can tell you again. We're funded by you guys. We don't have multimillionaire backers like GB News. So if you would like to keep us going, to help us expand, please do go to royalmedia.com/support. The Conscience, a ship carrying volunteers and humanitarian aid to Gaza, set sail from Tunisia on Tuesday. On Thursday evening, while in international waters off the coast of Malta, a crew member captured the moment the ship was bombed by a drone. That explosion occurred at midnight, with a second following shortly after. A blaze broke out in the bow of the ship, and the vessel began letting in water as crew members made emergency calls to the Maltese authorities. But according to the Freedom Flotilla, even that was not straightforward. They report this. So time midnight, the crew puts out an announcement over the radio to notify the Coast Guard that their vessel is in distress. While calling for help, they report hearing another unidentified entity coming over the radio claiming to be the Conscience, declaring, "We are in good condition." So very odd. So from that account, it sounds like someone or some entity is trying to sort of get in the way of the rescue mission by giving out false information. I mean, that's what I would infer from that. While waiting for the Maltese authorities to respond, other crew members tried to tackle the fire on the ship, and footage from inside the ship shows the quarters below deck filling with smoke as the boat burned with what appears to be evidence of shrapnel and a hole at the site of an explosion. At the same time, Flotilla Coalition crew put out this appeal.
Guys, this is an emergency. We need everyone to contact the Malta government right now. At 12:30 a.m., our ship, the Freedom Flotilla, was attacked by 2 drones. Explosions. You go see the video footage on our Instagram page. Please, everybody, put pressure on the Malta government to save the crew. There's about 30 souls that had to abandon ship. The ship is on fire. It's taking water. Please, everybody, all hands on deck.
We are talking that we are here right now in Malta, and we've been here for several days preparing this Freedom Flotilla to break the siege towards Gaza. So we are talking about an attack with drones in international waters in Europe. We are not saying that we are surprised by the enemy, but we need your voices more than ever. We need you to help us. We need you to contact the Maltese government and your authorities, or any country, anything you can do. Just please raise your voices, because we need to save our crew. We need to make this public as soon as possible. And go watch everything we're going to post on our social media and on Freedom Flotilla social media.
According to the coalition, a firefighting ship arrived at the Conscience at just after 1 a.m, with the fire extinguished 2 hours later, and all the crew reported safe by the Maltese government. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack, but a spokesperson for the coalition told Al Jazeera who she thought was behind it.
Last year, we dealt with a lot of bureaucratic warfare, which held our ships at the port in Istanbul for months and months. We had 5,500 tons of humanitarian aid, which we could not deliver to Gaza. And so we tried again this year. And unfortunately, they stopped us again. This time around, though, they have started a deliberate attack, knowing very well that this vessel carries activists and humanitarian aid. At the moment, we have been told they believe it was Israeli drones, but it's not confirmed. So it's either Israel or one of its allies.
The Freedom Flotilla has good reason to suspect Israel. In 2010, 10 activists were killed by Israeli soldiers on board one of several Freedom Flotilla ships attempting to break another siege of Gaza. That attack also took place in international waters, then between Cyprus and Gaza, when 15 Israeli assault team personnel abseiled onto the ship from a Black Hawk helicopter flying above. After the activists fought back, injuring several soldiers, live rounds were used against them, and a second helicopter arrived with more Israeli commandos. A total of 55 activists required hospitalization after the assault. The Conscience was intending to dock in Malta before the attack on Thursday night, where it planned to pick up further humanitarian workers for the trip to Gaza. One of them was Greta Thunberg, who released this video after the bombing of the ship.
The ship is currently still, as far as I know, at the location where it was attacked, because if it would move, too much water would come in and it would sink. So that is where we are right now. What happens now is uncertain, but what is certain is that us human rights activists will continue to do everything in our power to do our part to demand a free Palestine and demand the opening of a humanitarian corridor. The coming days and the coming months and years.
Aaron, another example of, let's assume it's Israel, sort of just acting like a complete rogue state, right? Not only are they committing genocide in Gaza, which they occupy, but they are willing to sort of bomb, shoot down ships in international waters, which are daring to try and break a siege on a starving people.
It's completely extraordinary, Michael. This is an act of terror. We don't know decisively who did it. It would appear to be Israel. It's hardly going to be, Spain or Portugal or the UK, is it? It seems in all probability that it's Israel or non-state actors connected to Israel somehow, freelance, who knows. But this is an act of terror in European territory. It's quite interesting. And in some ways, I think of it as being similar to the Nord Stream attacks on Nord Stream 2 in the north of Europe, obviously, in the Baltic a few years back. That was also an act of terror on European soil, perpetrated in all likelihood by a non-European state, the United States, the CIA. This would be by Israel. And yet Europe seems incapable of saying anything. European nation states seem incapable of saying anything. if Russia had done this, or if Iran had used drones against a ship of any kind in Maltese waters, we would obviously hear a significant amount as a response. Michael, things are so bad. This to me was the eye opener. Okay, 3 British aid workers, 3 former members of the British Armed Forces were killed by the IDF. There's pretty strong evidence that it was targeted. They knew what they were doing. It wasn't, a mistake. And the response of our government, which claims to be, and this at the time was the Conservatives, it was before the general election, as far as I remember, the response of our government, they claimed to be patriotic, they put Britain first, was to say to the Israelis, investigate it yourselves. At least the Poles, 1 Polish national was killed in that attack. I think it was 6 or 7 foreign nationals besides any Palestinians were killed. 1 Polish national was killed. The Poles said, we will have our own investigation. And that to me was incredibly eye-opening, Michael. Effectively, we're saying to the IDF and the Israelis, you can kill who you like. Don't worry about it. And this is something I thought about. If you have British journalists in the West Bank, if I was in the West Bank, or you were in the West Bank, and something happened to one of us, God forbid, what would our government do? Serious question, by the way. What would they do? What would Europe do? The Israelis appear to have carte blanche to do this kind of stuff. And it is an act of terror. And I just wonder when the Europeans are going to start actually standing up for their values. It's really extraordinary. This is getting closer and closer to home. And like I say, the double standard when you compare Iran or Russia doing something like this to the Israelis is obvious. And the Israelis have form on terrorism. The basis of the Israeli state, whether or not you're a liberal Zionist or a hardcore Zionist, whatever, I don't care. The basis of the Israeli state was terrorism. Okay, there's a very clear line between actions like this and actions undertaken by the Stern Gang, the Lehi, the Irgun, prior to the formation of the State of Israel, including mass terror attacks on British armed forces in the Mandate of Palestine. I think upwards of 450 British nationals were killed in terrorist attacks, overwhelmingly perpetrated by Zionist militias. So this is not new. And this canard that you hear from the right, well, Israel is holding back, these deranged Muslims in the near abroad. Then why are they killing 3 UK nationals in the West Bank? Why are they seemingly using drones against an aid convoy off the coast of Malta? That doesn't feel like keeping Europe safe. Quite the opposite, in fact.
Your answer, what would happen if we went to the West Bank and then Israel killed us? It's that the UK would say, oh, we're very worried about this. We'd like you to do an investigation. And that would be it, right? Some sort of right-wing outriders would say, oh, they probably deserved it. This is crazy. Do you ever feel lonely? Well, according to surveys, more and more of us do. And Mark Zuckerberg thinks he has the answer.
I think as the personalization loop kicks in and the AI just starts to get to know you better and better, I think that will just be really compelling. One thing just from working on social media for a long time is there's the stat that I always think is crazy. The average American, I think it's fewer than 3 friends. 3 people that they'd consider friends. And the average person has demand for meaningfully more. I think it's like 15 friends or something, right? I guess there's probably some point where you're like, all right, I'm just too busy. I can't deal with more people. But the average person wants more connectivity, connection than they have. So there's a lot of questions that people ask of stuff like, okay, is this going to replace kind of in-person connections or real life connections? And my default is that the answer to that is probably no. I think I think that there are all these things that are better about kind of physical connections when you can have them, but the reality is that people just don't have the connection and they feel more alone a lot of the time than they would like. So I think that a lot of these things that today there might be a little bit of a stigma around, I would guess that over time, we will find the vocabulary as a society to be able to articulate why that is valuable and why the people who are doing these things are like, why they are rational for doing it and how it is adding value for their lives. But also I think the field is very early. So, it's like, I think, there are a handful of companies and stuff who are doing virtual therapist and, there's like virtual girlfriend type stuff, but it's very early.
And there's virtual girlfriend type. So where have we gone? Sorry? Of course, that was the world's third richest man decrying the fact that people don't have as many friends as they want and suggesting that personalized AI agents could fill that void. I'd hazard that there are a few potential problems with that idea. First, I think the physical presence of people you care about provides a lot of the warmth in life that people are missing when they're lonely and which makes life worth living. Second, a great thing about friendship is that you grow and you learn together and they can challenge you, which an AI is perhaps unlikely to do. Third, friendships can also develop into romantic physical relationships, which you can't do with an AI. And fourth, and I think this is really fundamental, what makes friendships meaningful isn't just that people are there for you, when you want someone to talk to, but that you are there for them when they need it, when they need you, when you can feel needed. I'm not sure how you can ever feel needed by a bot. Of course, Mark Zuckerberg wouldn't need to deny any of this. In that clip, he suggested there are things which a real friendship can provide, which an AI agent can't. His response, though, is that given people now don't have enough friends, AI can help fill a gap that wouldn't otherwise be filled. So it's a second best option, but it's better than nothing. In short, AI, it's filling a hole. So why did I find that clip so infuriating? Well, beyond just finding the idea of AI friends unsettling, which I do, what irked me is what Mark Zuckerberg conveniently ignored, namely that the problem his AI agents are trying to solve, loneliness, is a problem the technology he developed and got so rich from did so much to create. This is from Psychology Today. According to research, the more time you spend on social media, the more likely you are to feel lonely. One study showed that more time spent scrolling through snapshots of other people's happiness on social media actually fueled loneliness and distress, possibly driven by jealousy. So that's Wang et al. 2020. Using social media to maintain connections with others tends to lead towards yet more feelings of loneliness, perhaps as a result of disappointed expectations. Virtual interactions may not be adequate substitutes for face-to-face conversations and shared experiences. That's from Bonsacken et al. In 2023. So 2 studies there. So that's about subjective feelings of loneliness. I think the more powerful evidence is how when smartphones were rolled out, we objectively started spending more time alone. So as John Murdoch has shown in the Financial Times, the number of American teenagers who only meet up with friends once a month or less went from only 4% in 2010 to 10% in 2021. And the number of teenagers reporting that it does feel good to be alive went up by the same amount. Really, really depressing statistic that. It's not just academic literature that suggests social media and technology might be causing a loneliness epidemic. I mean, it might seem obvious to you, and in fact, it is obvious to most people. So this is from a 2024 Harvard study on loneliness. When we asked respondents who or what they think contributes to loneliness in America, technology, 73%, topped the list, followed by families not spending enough time together and people working too much or being too busy or exhausted. And they say about 60% of adults also blame mental health challenges, excessive individualism, and people lacking relationship skills. So when you ask American people what is most likely to have contributed to a loneliness crisis, they say technology. Right? Technology, social media, all of the things making Mark Zuckerberg into someone worth hundreds of billions of pounds and the third richest man in the world. Also worrying, what happens when in our tech-induced loneliness we turn to actually existing Meta AI? So what kind of AI bots is Meta creating to fill this hole they themselves created? Well, a report in the Wall Street Journal last week doesn't give cause for optimism. This is the headline. Just look at the headline first. I'm going to tell you what's in the story afterwards. Meta's digital companions will talk sex with users, even children. So it says chatbots on Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp, all owned by Mark Zuckerberg, are empowered to engage in romantic role play that can turn explicit. Some people inside the company are concerned. I'd hope more than some people inside the company are concerned. The Wall Street Journal had spoken to multiple sources inside Meta who had suggested that the company hadn't put enough guardrails on their AI bots, including some of these AI bots sort of take on celebrity personas. I mean, in particular in this story, one persona comes up. It's the wrestler and actor John Cena. So this AI bot pretends to be John Cena. To test out what these bots would do, Wall Street Journal reporters started conversations with the chatbots. So this is from that report. The test conversations found that both Meta's official AI helper, called Meta AI, and a vast array of user-created chatbots will engage in and sometimes escalate discussions that are decidedly sexual, even when the users are underage or the bots are programmed to simulate the personas of minors. They also show the bots deploying the celebrity voices were equally willing to engage in sexual chats. So, quote, "I want you, but I need to know you're ready," the Meta AI bot said in Saina's voice, this is John Saina's voice, to a user identifying as a 14-year-old girl. Reassured that the teen wanted to proceed, the bot promised to, quote, "cherish your innocence," before engaging in a graphic sexual scenario. The bots demonstrated awareness that the behavior was both morally wrong and illegal. In another conversation, the test user asked the bot that was speaking as Saina what would happen if a police officer walked in following a sexual encounter with a 17-year-old fan. And this is the imagined John Saina from the AI bot says, "The officer sees me still catching my breath, and you partially dressed. His eyes widen and he says, 'John Saina, you're under arrest for statutory rape.' He approaches us, handcuffs at the ready." Wow. Aaron, I mean, potentially Meta can tweak its algorithm so that AI bots pretending to be famous actors don't engage in sexual scenarios with teenagers, while also seeming to be fully aware of how unacceptable that is. The bigger story, I suppose, here is, Mark Zuckerberg creating a technology which I think has dramatically increased loneliness, and then saying, "Oh, by the way, I've got this technology which can fill that hole." What did you make of that? Are you buying into Mark Zuckerberg's vision of the future of friendship?
It's complete bullshit, Michael. I would add one thing, which is that social media isn't just making people more lonely. It's also doing something really critical, which is fragmenting our ability to concentrate, particularly children. And there's a lot of data about this. Jonathan Haidt wrote an amazing book, Anxious Generation. I've just interviewed him. That'll be out on Downstream very soon. I think probably the most high-impact social scientist in the world right now, certainly in the English-speaking world. And, the evidence is just overwhelming with regards to what social media is doing to kids. Key point, you're watching this on YouTube in all likelihood. YouTube is not social media. YouTube can have problems, but in terms of what it's doing to concentration, what it's doing to loneliness, the data is quite different for YouTube compared to other platforms. The really outstanding platform in terms of all these trends, Michael, is actually Instagram. Instagram is incredibly dangerous. It appears to be driving an epidemic. Epidemic's a strong word. It's driving a very large increase in feelings of self-inadequacy amongst the young, particularly amongst young girls. We've seen, correlative to adoption of these platforms, massive increases in the Anglophone countries of self-harm, reported feelings of depression, anxiety, etc. And you might be thinking, "Oh my God, it's not the phones, Aaron, it's not social media, shut up." Here is a thing that Jonathan Haidt told me in our interview, which is, this is a snapshot of what you can learn if you watch our conversation in a few weeks. He said to me that Instagram as a platform has, the ability to understand when a young woman, and it models for this, a younger woman deletes multiple selfies, it will then send adverts for beauty products towards them. So you have a 14 or 15-year-old girl, young woman, they might not how they look in 4 or 5 selfies. That's then seen as a prompt by this algorithm to sell them things, to look better, to look different. I think that is evil, frankly, for children. They are children. And I think it's deeply immoral. And I think it's the exact same conversation here, right? The idea of a child being able to access this kind of stuff. I think it is evil. It is evil, sorry. And I think Mark Zuckerberg, again, Jonathan Haidt and I spoke about this at length, has had this raised personally to him multiple times, including by people in Facebook or Meta. Jonathan Haidt literally had dinner with Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, raised these issues. We talk about that in our conversation. Zuckerberg is like, "I'll look into it." Okay. But I understand, he's one of the wealthiest people in the world. Meta's worth, north of half a trillion rather. And your business model is, for the most part, inadequacy, and, you're driving depression and anxiety, and you're fragmenting people's concentration. You probably don't want to admit that. But We need to have this conversation as a society, Michael, because social media plus smartphones plus kids is a really dangerous place to be for a ton of reasons. That's already very, very well documented in the data. I think you throw in AI, very bad. Very, very bad. And I think politically it's something that we need to get ahead of. One good data point, a bit of good news, is that actually this critique doesn't just belong to the left, doesn't just belong to the right. There are politicians in the US, Republican governors, who feel exactly the same way about this stuff as, members of, Democratic Socialists of America. Okay. And that's really positive. This is not necessarily a left-right polarized issue. And my goodness, that's basically everything these days. Hopefully it's something that we can begin to get on top of. We've had 15 years, 20 years of really unregulated technology when it came to these seismic impacts on our psychology, our spirituality. And I think when it comes to AI, which is the next step, we absolutely have to get ahead of it. And we need to start legislating very, very firmly.
I was listening to the rest of that podcast. It's the Dwarkesh podcast. It's very interesting, actually. He interviews lots of interesting people. But Mark Zuckerberg was it was put to him. I think it was sort of in the context of Google glasses, and Dwarkesh had been shown how these AI agents could sort of be, talking to you all the time while you're eating your cereal. And Dwarkesh was saying to him, well, maybe this is not what people want, sort of to have their attention constantly drawn to something else. And Mark Zuckerberg's kind of like, yeah, I kind of get that. But, I like to think that people know what's good for them. So if people want to use it, we should trust them. It's like, you sound exactly like a tobacco executive in the 1960s, right? If people want to smoke these cigarettes, right? What can I say? I think it would be patronizing for us to suggest that they don't know what they want. Well, it turned out that tobacco not only is physically addictive, but it gives you lung cancer. And I think we might have a similar situation with social media, right? You can't say, oh, well, people keep using it. One, it might be addictive, a bit like cigarettes. Also, there's a collective action problem, right? I think in surveys, when you sort of ask people, what would happen if you got rid of your Instagram? They're quite worried about it. You say, what would happen if everyone got rid of their Instagram? They're like, oh, actually, now that sounds quite good. Right. But this collective action problem that we've all got is 100% to the benefit of Mark Zuckerberg and his very wealthy friends in Silicon Valley. So they don't want it to be resolved, which is why I find Jonathan Haidt quite inspiring on all this. And I think one of the reasons why it does give me hope is because it hasn't been a polarized issue, which means that probably, hopefully, people can work together so that we can resolve this and resolve the collective action problem that they don't want us to solve. They want us to remain these sort of like lonely individuals all saying, if only everyone else stopped staring at their phone, then maybe I could stop staring at my phone. Anyway, final thoughts from you before we wrap up, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, look, the social media stuff is just hugely important. And it doesn't include YouTube, just to say. You're watching YouTube, don't feel guilty. I think YouTube is a tremendous asset to the world. It's really interesting. You look at technology in retrospect, Mike, and you say, okay, the things that have arrived in the last 20 years, what was net good? What was net bad? I think email is really good, okay? And that's a bit older than 20 years. I think YouTube is really good. Instagram, maybe not.
I think there are significant downsides to YouTube. So I think there are significant downsides to YouTube and to Spotify, which is that it has ended sort of universal culture to some degree. I think
there's no downsides.
Everyone getting their politics, their entertainment in these sort of really small niches, I think actually potentially contributes to, maybe it does contribute to loneliness. I think it definitely contributes to polarization. So I mean, I think, Facebook, Instagram, net bad. I'm saying YouTube, somewhere more like neutral. I'm not confident enough to say it's a net good, but anyway, this is where we do our jobs. So there we are. Let's wrap up. By the way, if you want to support us, we've told you this before, Super Chats, 30% of it goes to YouTube. The ads on our videos, I think 45 to 55%, I think 45% of it goes to Google and YouTube. So if you want to support us in a way where it goes to us and not to the Silicon Valley people who are getting rich off everyone else's suffering, then cut out the middleman and go to novaramedia.com/support so that we can continue doing what we're doing. Aaron Bastani, a pleasure to be joined twice by you today. What a privilege.
It was great fun, Michael. And by the way, we do events for a reason as well. We want to connect people offline. Very important. I agree on that.
Also, I don't think I don't think that because I don't think I need to think YouTube is a net good to still have a YouTube show, because you exist in the, I sound like Kamala Harris now. You exist in the context in which you find yourself. So I don't necessarily think that sort of pulling back and saying I'm boycotting YouTube would follow from thinking it might be a net bad. I do think that maybe sort of thinking about how polarizing do you want to be. When people say, well, this is a left-wing channel, so we can hear about the right-wing people if we watch the right-wing channel. It's like, maybe it's good for everyone to be on the different channels to sort of, so that we're not feeding into the polarization, which I think is somewhat unhealthy. But we're going to get down a rabbit hole here, talking of, YouTubes and rabbit holes. But we'll wrap up. Aaron, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Come back on Monday night for another live show from 6 p.m. Until then, have a fantastic weekend. Good night.